Director here at McFarland Senior Outreach. So welcome to everyone who is here and everyone watching from home. We are very happy today to be welcoming the Advanced Care Planning team from UW Health to talk about advanced care planning. So this month on the 16th is National Healthcare Decisions Day, and we want to encourage everyone of all ages to make sure that they have all of their advanced care planning, that they've been putting some thought into it and have all of the documents they need in order, but particularly important for our older adults. So we are so happy today to be welcoming Parini and Mary from UW Health.
Thank you. So thanks for the introduction, and my name is Mary. I'm a social worker by background working at UW Health, and I previously worked in the trauma and medical intensive care unit, so really worked a lot with families when having to make tough decisions, right? No one ever wants to think of themselves or their loved ones really sick in the hospital. And so that really led me to be passionate about, like, let's have these conversations earlier, right, prior to the crisis. So that is part of why I'm passionate about this work, and we'll talk more about advanced care planning as we move through, but I'll let my colleague introduce herself as well.
Hi everyone, thanks for being here. I'm Parini, also an advanced care planning coordinator, program coordinator, and also a social worker by background. I too, for several years, was the social worker in the neuro ICU at UW Health. So, people showing up with catastrophic brain injuries, whether that be an unexpected stroke or a car accident. So, one day everything's okay and the next day life is totally changed. And like Mary said, really seeing what a difference it can make in the patient's life and in their loved one's life, of it knowing what their wishes are, having the ability, the legal authority to make decisions on their behalf, and the difference when those documents weren't in place. So we like getting out to the community. These are conversations that we should be having while we're able. We don't want to wait until it's too late. So thank you all for being here today.
And before we continue, I just want to do a volume check. How's the volume for everyone here? Can you hear okay, or do you need a little bit louder? We're good? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, well, we already skipped this slide, so we're going to move ahead. That was a little bit about us, but we'll jump in to talk about so we're all on the same level about what is advanced care planning? Why are we here? What are we talking about? And so it really is planning ahead if there was ever an instance where you were unable to make your own healthcare decisions. So that could be something like a car accident, an illness, or an injury. And it would leave you unable to communicate, and someone would have to make those decisions on your behalf. Now, when we think about advanced care planning and how we document those wishes on paper, we document those in an advanced directive. It's kind of this umbrella term up there. And there's different type of documents that we're going to talk about, but the one that's most common and most important and included in your folder is a power of attorney for healthcare, which we'll talk about a little bit more.
So just real briefly before we talk about that power of attorney for healthcare, I just want to very briefly touch on the power of attorney for finances and property. So that is not something that the UW Health social workers can assist with, but I just like to give it a call out that it is an important document to fill out as well. This is something where you can name a person that would be able to manage your financial affairs. It's different than a power of attorney in that your agent, your person that you choose, has authority right away to be able to act upon your behalf. And if you don't complete a power of attorney and later are unable to, it may be that there's no one that would have legal authority to access your bank statements, or your bank account, pay your rent, manage your financial affairs for you. So it's really recommended. We're going to focus today on that power of attorney for healthcare, but I just wanted to give a little shout out for that. There are free forms available here at this website, and this is a form that does require a notary. So make sure you're signing it in front of a notary. And just kind of call out here, unfortunately, it's not something that we help with at UW Health, but you can do them yourselves. It does not require an attorney to fill out. Okay, so let's move on to what are we talking about today. So as Mary said, there are several types of advance directives, but that power of attorney for healthcare is the one that we really recommend, and it's the one that's in your folder. And what it is it's a written legal document. So this is a legal document. You have to be of sound mind to complete this document. So that's why I say we want to do these things before something happens, like that catastrophic traumatic car accident where you have a brain injury. You want to be able to do these things while you can engage and understand the meaning of a legal document. And what it does is it's a form that allows you to pick someone to be your healthcare decision maker if something were to ever happen such that you couldn't do that yourself. And we call that person a healthcare agent. So you may hear us use that word throughout, healthcare agent. And then you also have the ability to outline your treatment preferences in a power of attorney for healthcare. And I am going to play a quick video. Let's see if the audio, we didn't test that out.
There are no guarantees. None of us know when we might get in an accident, when we might get really sick.
Who knows what tomorrow brings? And at least just start, at least just have the initial conversation.
I remember sitting in the basement of the hospital with my parents and screaming like a crazy person because it was very emotional and very stressful, saying, I don't know what he wants. I have no idea.
What if we hadn't done this, and what if we hadn't done that? What if we had waited another 24 hours? And I think by having your advance directive and giving direction, you're taking, hopefully, that guilt away from them.
It could come up when you're at dinner. It can come up when you're watching a movie. At any time.
It's a great opportunity to get to know each other better.
We may sometimes say, are you serious? Is that really what you mean? And they'll explain, yes, that's really what I want.
If something happens to me, I want the doctors to do everything possible.
My family knows that I don't want any heroic measures to be taken.
I don't like pain that much, so I would say as much pain medication as possible.
I would not want to be a burden on the family.
I would like to be comfortable, kept comfortable, and alert as possible in order to be with my family during those last times.
I would like to have my choir, come around and sing the songs like we usually sing together.
It flows so much easier when the final wishes are documented, they're in place, and the family is essentially with one accord or on the same sheet of music.
Welcome the opportunity to have the conversation.
Have that conversation.
Have a conversation just as a family.
I would encourage families to have the conversation.
We talk all the time about being close and about being loving, but what does it actually mean? When we say, I plan to put my life in your hands, there's seriously nothing sweeter to do.
Okay, so the folks in the video talked a little bit about why advanced care planning was important to them to learn about their loved ones. And so Prini and I just want to take a second to talk about why we think it's important, and hopefully you'll share some of these values. So one, just knowing that dementia is the most common reason that people lose the ability to guide their own care. So when we still have our full capacity, being able to express and to document what our wishes are in advance is really important. We never know what the future might bring, so kind of preparing just in case is always a good idea. I think Prini kind of talks about it like your seatbelt. When you get in your car and buckle your seatbelt, you're not anticipating you're going to get in an accident, but it's something you can do today so that if something does happen, it helps to protect you. A second thing is working in the ICU, we both really saw how much stress it can be on loved ones when making decisions for their family members. The one lady in the video said she didn't know what her husband would want, and that was really hard. So being able to think about this in advance of what would you want, and then to be able to talk with your family members about what your wishes are. It can help people receive the care that's most important to them. And then this is a big one, that healthcare agents in Wisconsin have a legally recognized status as a decision maker, which we're going to talk more about next. So here in Wisconsin, there's a lot of great things about Wisconsin and different protections. And one thing that a lot of people don't know about, which has its pros and cons, is Wisconsin is not a next of kin state. So what that means is family members do not automatically have the legal authority to make decisions for other members in their family. For example, I'm married. My spouse does not automatically have legal authority to make decisions for me if something were to happen to me. So if a person is unable to make healthcare decisions for themselves, and they haven't completed this document when we're talking about a healthcare power of attorney, a guardianship order might need to be filed to be admitted into a long-term care facility. And that can be a pretty pricey and lengthy process. Now, at UW Hospital, we work with people all the time who unfortunately don't yet have a healthcare power of attorney or never did one and can't complete one. And during the hospital setting, while they're getting their care, we'll still use their next of kin kind of informally to make decisions. But knowing that Wisconsin's not a next of kin state, and when you need to leave the hospital and go to that next level of care, that can create some barriers. So Parini's going to talk through an example of how this might play out to kind of better understand it.
So I'll share a little example, and then I'm going to pause because, this is probably one of our biggest takeaway messages for people to sort of understand when you're a resident of Wisconsin. So I want to leave time for questions. So this is not a real patient, but at any given time, this is very accurate to what a patient may look like at UW Hospital. So I'm going to talk about Jamie. Unfortunately, Jamie suffered a major stroke and has extensive care needs. Jamie has spent several weeks in the intensive care unit, and now Jamie is ready to transfer to a rehabilitation unit. Jamie never completed a power of attorney for healthcare and no longer has decision-making capacity. Because of those Wisconsin laws that Mary talked about, the long-term care or the rehabilitation unit cannot accept Jamie until a legal decision maker is appointed. So while Jamie's in the hospital, his wife's going to be making all the care decisions, deciding, this treatment, that treatment, where are they going to go for rehabilitation. UW Health is or a healthcare system is allowing Jamie's wife to make those decisions. But because of Wisconsin laws, Jamie's wife is not the legal decision maker. She's an informal surrogate, but has no legal authority because a power of attorney for healthcare was never completed. So that rehabilitation unit legally cannot accept Jamie unless there is a legal decision maker. And so now Jamie's wife is going to have to petition the courts to become his legal guardian. What that means is it's a lengthy process, like Mary mentioned. It can take several weeks to get a guardianship petition filed, which means Jamie's sitting in the hospital for more days where he should be at the rehabilitation unit, but he's stuck in the hospital waiting for that court process to happen. It's also expensive. Oftentimes it requires hiring a private attorney, which can be $3,000 to $5,000, sometimes more. And like I said, it's a delay in that much needed rehabilitation. And it's also just really stressful. So we have Jamie's wife who's well-intentioned, making great decisions. And yet we're saying, hey, I know you're doing all the right things, but you don't have the legal authority. So on top of dealing with your husband's catastrophic stroke, you also have to go through this lengthy court process. It's just really stressful for loved ones to go through that. So you go through this whole process. Jamie's wife files with the court. A petition is filed for her to become the guardian. And now she has the legal authority to get Jamie into that rehabilitation unit. Any questions about this? Was this a surprise to anyone? Yeah, okay. Usually it is. Most people don't. We're one of few states that are not a next of kin state. Yeah, Katie.
What would happen, let's say, if you were a snowbird and you were in a different state, like Florida or Arizona or something like that, but you have a power of attorney for healthcare signed for Wisconsin? How does that work if something happened when you were elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'll just repeat the question. Are there people viewing this at home?
I'm not sure if it's live right now or if it'll just...
Okay, I'll repeat the question. So the question is, if you're a snowbird, maybe you live in Florida half the time, Wisconsin half the time, and you've completed this Wisconsin power of attorney for healthcare, but now something happens in Florida. So Wisconsin honors out-of-state power of attorney. So if it was the other way around, say it was that Florida, you completed a Florida one and that happens in Wisconsin, we will honor an out-of-state document as long as it was completed, valid, in a valid way. And vice versa, most other states, in fact, I don't know that I've encountered one that isn't reciprocal, will honor an out-of-state document. So Florida would honor that Wisconsin power of attorney for healthcare. The one caveat is that each individual state might have different rules. So Wisconsin is very unique to this admission to nursing home law that we have. So whatever document you fill out, you want to make sure that it kind of covers all needed areas. But we would accept a Florida one, Florida would accept ours. And that's a good question because that actually happens quite a lot where people are, in between two different states. Do you want to add anything to that, Mary? Oh, yeah.
You may be a resident of Wisconsin, and you don't have a POA in Wisconsin, but you're in a different state visiting relatives. Their laws may be different than ours. Florida, New Hampshire, whatever. How would that translate?
Yeah. So you're subject to the laws of the state that you're in when you're receiving that care. So let's say you're a Wisconsin resident, right? You don't have the power of attorney for healthcare, and you are at a parade in Florida and you fall, and you need to go to a nursing home in Florida. You would be subject to the laws in Florida as far as being admitted to a nursing home. And like Pranny and I both said, Wisconsin's very conservative in that you have to have this document or a legal decision maker for a skilled nursing facility admission. Not all states are. But we really recommend anyone over the age of 18 to have a power of attorney for healthcare just in case. If you're somebody who's like, I've done a power of attorney for healthcare before, but you maybe haven't really looked at it, or we're kind of talking through things today and you're like, oh, I want to make sure my document has that, we are also happy to review anyone's document that they previously completed. And at the end, we'll talk more about opportunities for kind of individual one-to-one follow-up, or we're happy to help you make a new one if you decide that your old one doesn't meet your needs. Yeah. Other questions on that?
If someone's admitted for major surgery and the spouse doesn't have power of attorney and that person, the patient, has a stroke, whatever, during heart surgery or whatever, do you automatically advise them when they're admitted to get a power of attorney, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Do you want to field that one?
Sure. So every patient that gets admitted to the hospital, there's actually a federal law that requires us to offer advanced care planning services to that patient. So say that patient you're talking about maybe is coming in for heart surgery, but has full capacity, able to make decisions for themselves. They should be offered the opportunity to complete a power of attorney, or at least be offered a form to take a look at. So, I mean, there may be times, maybe it's a middle of the night hospital admission, they're sent to the operating room within hours, and we just didn't have enough time to get to the patient, unfortunately, before maybe that stroke happened in the operating room. But in most cases, we try to assess that when the patient has been admitted to the hospital. It's part of the nursing admission assessment. Yeah, great question. Any others? Okay.
I just had gone back for the
okay. Okay. So we're going to be walking through an actual power of attorney for Wisconsin, a power of attorney for healthcare for the state of Wisconsin. And I kind of just want to get you thinking about what you might put in your document, or what, kind of trying to think of what does matter to me. How do I figure out what my goals, my values, my preferences are? And this is what we can help guide people with when we meet with them one-on-one. And so we encourage people to explore their previous experiences. So, for all of you reflecting on what are your experiences with serious illness or hospitalization? Maybe you personally have been in the hospital, or maybe you have a loved one. When we meet with people, we often hear, I was with my mom when she was terminally ill with cancer. I saw the suffering she endured. Or maybe my mom had hospice and I saw how comfortable and at peace she was. This went really well, this went terribly, I would never want this for myself. So we all kind of sometimes have experiences that help guide what we may or may not want for ourselves. And so we encourage you to reflect back, think on those experiences. What did you learn from that? And what might you take away for what kind of care you would or wouldn't want for yourself? we also encourage people to really think about what gives their life meaning. And so thinking about what activities in your life are of such importance that without them, you may reconsider your treatment preferences. So, that may be someone who says, if I can't, live independently, if I can't take care of my own basic hygiene, I wouldn't want my life prolonged. We've also worked with people who have said, a beating heart is a beating heart, and as long as my heart is beating, any life to me is worth living. We've had the other extreme. I had a patient who told me, if I can't ride my Harley Davidson, that is no longer a life worth living to me. I would want heroic measures to be stopped. And there really is no right or wrong answer. It really is so individualized to what gives your life meaning. But thinking about that can really help guide your loved ones. Maybe they're faced with having to decide whether or not to do some surgery or not. And then they can say to the doctor, hey, mom told me that she needs to be able to get back to gardening to feel like this is a life worth living for her. Would this surgery get her back to gardening 6 months down the road? It can help guide some of those decisions. And then lastly, thinking about our cultural, our religious, our spiritual beliefs. Think about what helps you face serious challenges. Do you have any beliefs that might influence your treatment decisions? And then sometimes we work with people who really want to discuss this with their faith leader prior to putting that pen to paper and filling out the document, which we, of course, encourage. Any questions about this?
So as Prini mentioned earlier, the person you choose to make decisions on your behalf, if you can't make your own decisions, is called a healthcare agent. On the left side here, we're talking about kind of when does that healthcare agent's authority begin? So you are always your own decision maker unless two different providers both evaluate you and say you can't make your own decisions. This could be temporary, so maybe you're in a car accident, you hit your head, you're delirious, you can't make decisions, but that's going to resolve. Or it might be long-term. Maybe there's a memory impairment or something else where it's not anticipated that you're going to improve. And in either of those cases, your power of attorney for healthcare can be activated. Think of it like a light switch, right? If you can't make your own decisions, we can turn that document on. We can activate it, which means your healthcare agents are making decisions for you. If you get better and can make your own decisions again, we turn the light switch off. Your document's no longer considered active. And it just takes one provider to evaluate you to turn that document off, to say you have your own decision-making capacity again. So know that this is really a way for you to be in control of your healthcare. You're always making your own decisions until, like I said, two providers say you can't, and then it would go decision-making to the person you name on your form that you trust to make decisions. And even if, let's say, even if something happens to you, you're delirious or something else, we would always still at the hospital try to include you to the most extent possible. So I've worked with patients who are intubated, but maybe they can blink their eyes in response to a question or hold their eyes shut for a number of seconds, and we would still include them. Or can they give us a thumbs up, thumbs down? So maybe they can't make really high-level decisions, but they can still weigh in on what do they want for their care. So we would work with both the patient and their healthcare decision maker. Questions on that? Okay. So then kind of what are the responsibilities of a healthcare agent? Did you have a question?
I just wanted to make a comment. When talking about healthcare power of attorney or financial power of attorney, I think I had a misguided notion that once a form is filled out and you're named, per se, that it kicks in once that document is signed or whatever. I didn't realize that you had that switch. How does that happen? You have to, or the hospital or whoever goes to these two doctors and gets the switch turned on?
Yeah, good question. So the question was, she had thought that once you created a document, that it was kind of activated right away, right? That whoever you name as your healthcare decision maker kind of gave them authority or power right away. And since learning that's not the case, kind of how does this happen? So one thing you mentioned was a financial power of attorney, that document that Prini mentioned about money and property. Now that form usually is active right away when you sign it. That one kind of is turned on. unless you put in there that you only want it to be active when you can't make decisions. It's the healthcare agent one that typically, like the state form, isn't active right away. So it would be to get that document turned on, so to flip the light switch that the person doesn't have decision-making capacity. Maybe they're in the hospital, then it could be the doctors or nurse practitioners or a physician assistant to evaluate you. Or it could be in the outpatient setting, maybe your primary care physician, a psychiatrist, someone else involved in your care would need to kind of evaluate you and fill out. Most hospitals have a form or a process that they fill out to kind of activate that document. Does that make sense? Okay, thanks. That was a good question. So let's say this document's activated, right? Our healthcare agent is involved and they're helping to make decisions. What decisions can they make? So we're looking at the right-hand side. They could decide on tests, medicine, consent for surgery or other procedures. If they wanted a treatment started, they could say yes. They could say now is the time to stop that treatment if they felt like that was in line with your wishes. They'd be able to interpret your instructions on the form that you complete or what you've talked about previously when making decisions. They can review and release medical records as needed and arrange for your care and treatment in Wisconsin and kind of beyond. So those are the duties, kind of the primary duties of a healthcare agent, again, when the document is activated, when you can't make your own decisions. Yeah. No, good questions.
There's a difference between being a proxy, having access to someone else's information, or putting into, filling out the POA information. Can you distinguish the differences between the two?
Yeah, so the question was, there is what we call a proxy, and then there's a healthcare agent, and kind of what's the difference between the two. So when I think of like a proxy, kind of acting on someone's behalf, for example, sometimes people have where they can message their doctor on the computer, like MyChart or another kind of messaging system. And that you could get proxy. So my husband is not good at answering messages, whether it's text messages, emails, whatever. So I am a proxy on his messaging center for healthcare. So he's given me permission that I can read the messages coming in and I can help to respond back, right? I kind of control our family calendar. So that's kind of one way I think of a proxy. Another thing I think is sometimes people just want people to receive information. So maybe my husband, for example, I'm going to use him as a guinea pig. Hopefully he doesn't watch this. I have more medical knowledge than he does. So he sometimes wants me to be able to ask questions if he's at an appointment. So he fills out a release of information. And so basically what that allows is for me to be able to call the clinic and get information, but I can't make decisions on his behalf. I'm just kind of helping to collect information and support his decision making. So that's kind of one way I think of a proxy, where a healthcare agent is really, you appoint someone, like designate them legally on a form to be your decision maker if you can't. Preeny?
Yeah, like informal versus formal. Like the proxy or the surrogate is sort of an informal decision maker, whereas the healthcare agent is legally the formal decision maker.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, that last part of that top line where it says, can keep it going or stop it based on my instructions or my best interest. So suddenly the healthcare agent can kind of do what they want as long as it's determined that it's in your best interest.
So the question is on the slide, yep, it says that your healthcare agent can keep medical treatment going or stopping it based on your instructions or your best interest. So the form, which we're going to get to shortly on it, says your healthcare agent has to follow what you want. So if I say on my form, I would never want XYZ treatment, my healthcare agent can't say, you know what, I know better. I want Mary to have that treatment. But when best interests come into mind is, we can't think of all the different scenarios that might happen, right? And so it's if I've never expressed it on the form what I would or wouldn't want in that particular situation, or never talked with them, then my healthcare agent could use what they know about me, what my preferences are, and make a decision that they think best meets my interest.
So your agent could just decide that, no, never mind that. It's just in their best interest, unplug them.
No. So if I put on there, I want, let's say on my form, I say, I want life-prolonging treatment at all costs. I value the length of my life more than anything else. My healthcare agent, because that's known, and I put it on my form or I've talked to my doctor, can't say, nope, I don't want Mary to keep having life-prolonging treatment. They have to follow what I put on my form or what I've expressed as my wishes. They can only go by what they think is in my best interest if it's something I've never thought of before, never talked about before, where they're really kind of guessing and they don't know what that might be. Does that help to kind of clarify?
It just kind of leaves the door open, I think.
You know, I think that it does leave the door open a little bit, and I think that goes into you really want to trust the person that you're naming as your healthcare agent and want to have a conversation with them. So it's one thing to fill out the form, right? Like the form is one piece of it. We want to make sure that you have a document your wishes on paper. But another piece of it is talking with your healthcare agent and having a conversation where you can really talk about what it is that you would or wouldn't want. Because sometimes what we write down on paper, you know, can't capture everything we're thinking and feeling. So wanting to have that conversation and picking someone you really trust.
And if you have a physician that you really trust, those wishes can be made known or talked about with him or her.
Absolutely.
Beforehand.
Yep, so the comment was, and if you have a physician you trust, you can also talk about your wishes with them. Often we see people's healthcare wishes documented in their medical record. Anytime someone talks with Preeny or myself and we do a document in clinic, we always put that right in the medical record. We want it to kind of live in there and make sure that if someone has expressed their wishes, that we make sure that we put it on paper in their medical record so that we can follow it the best we can.
So the agent can act on their best, do it based on my instructions or my best interest. So if they determine it's in your best interest to unplug you, they can unplug you.
So sometimes at the hospital we've had where somebody has written in their healthcare power of attorney what they wanted for their wishes, right? And I'm just going to make up something that says they want dialysis forever. This is just a made up situation. And their healthcare agent might say, no, I don't want my wife to have dialysis forever. I want to stop it. And so sometimes we have to think about, like, are they making decisions that their agent wants? And if there's not, sometimes people can pursue in court getting that agent removed if they're not following the person's wishes. Usually we talk to the person prior about that, like, what is the role of a healthcare agent? How can we follow your wishes to try to prevent some of those situations?
And don't make the agent a beneficiary.
Well, I think that's always the comment was, don't make the agent the beneficiary. I think that goes back to really picking someone that you trust, that you think is going to, you know, follow your wishes. You want to take over?
And I would just add that, you know, any decision about discontinuing life-sustaining treatment is really made in collaboration with the medical team. So if there's any concern about the agent not acting in the best interest of a patient, that's always a pause. We bring the team together, the nursing staff, the social worker, the doctors. We all sit together and talk with that agent. Tell me why, you know, tell me what your understanding is of this situation. Tell me why you want this. And so they're not these like quick second, you know, decisions. We really do that in collaboration with the medical team. Okay, so we're gonna look at the power of attorney document. We are gonna be available next week for individualized appointments, but for those who can't make it, we're gonna walk you through this document step by step. So feel free to pull that form out. You won't probably have time to fill it out as we go just because of time constraints, but we'll kind of guide you through each section of it. I won't spend too much time on this, but just to call out that when you take this home and you kind of want to remember back, what did they say about this page? This is a nice tip sheet to reflect back on. It's a page-by-page review of that power of attorney document. Some of the questions are a little confusing on the state form, and this clarifies this, as well as the strict witnessing requirements. Okay, so I'm going to flip to page 1. We're right on the bottom right. It says page 1. And so this is sort of an instructional page that talks about what is this document. It says in summary that this is a document that's going to allow someone to appoint a decision maker, that healthcare agent, if they ever become unable to make healthcare decisions. This can be changed at any time. There's a number of ways you can revoke this document, and one of the ways is just to create a new one. The most recently dated document is the valid one. So you could create one today, change your mind tomorrow, and the one that you do tomorrow is the valid one. One important call out is that if you pick your spouse as your healthcare agent and you later become divorced, the document does become void. So after a divorce, you would always want to update this document. You can still pick your ex-spouse. It would just be it'd have to be after the date of divorce.
So page 2, again, the page numbers are in the bottom right-hand corner. This, at the very top, you'd put the date that you're completing the document. Then you'd put your name, address, and date of birth in that second box. And then here where we have the numbers, this is where you're going to name your healthcare agent. So again, the person you trust to make decisions on your behalf if you can't. You can pick a first choice and a second choice. We recommend not listing two people on the same line. For example, if we listed Polly Pocket and Barbie on the same line, that would mean they would have to make decisions together and have to come to a consensus. And that can be really challenging if things like time is really important, we need a decision. And even people get along really well, sometimes in a stressful situation can lead to conflict or disagreement. So we really recommend that you only list one person per line. So your first person is who we'd go to first if you couldn't make your own decision. If they were unavailable or unwilling, we'd go then to your second choice. And again, when thinking about who you name as your healthcare agent, you really want to pick someone you trust to make decisions. Sorry about that. Let's get back in. Okay. One second here. We'll problem solve this. Okay, thank you. Oh, we're back. We're back. Okay. Thank you.
We're all good. Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay. And it doesn't match.
Oh no.
It's.
Should we just close out of the PowerPoint and reopen it? Maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know if that will do anything.
Hold tight with us. You want to talk about other things to think
Yeah,
about?
So talking about a healthcare agent, really that's one of the most important decisions you're going to make. I mean, to your point previously of who's going to make the decision based off my best interest. So they have to be an adult. You have to pick someone who's over the age of 18. You want to pick someone who's available by phone. We get lots of people who say, you know, my son lives in California. Is it okay if I pick him? Absolutely. You can pick someone who lives in a different country, in a different state. You just want to make sure that we can access them in some way. Maybe that's email, maybe that's phone. It's absolutely okay. You want to pick the person who knows you best. Who is going to be your voice if you no longer have a voice and can tell us what you want? So sometimes people say, oh, I need to pick my oldest child. They're the oldest. But when we sit down and we really talk to them, we hear, you know, I don't actually think my oldest knows me and knows what I want. It's my youngest that really knows what my preferences are. And someone who can really handle emotional situations. This is, you know, if something happens and now your loved ones are making decisions for you, this is stressful. This can be really emotional. I mean, especially if we're talking about something as drastic as removing life-prolonging treatment. So who is someone that can sort of be able to advocate for you even in a really stressful time? That is a good person to choose. And kind of what I said, who's going to follow your choices even if they don't agree with them? So, you know, maybe on your form you said, Mary's example, I never want dialysis. Who's going to be able to really honor that for you? Who's not going to, you know, because this is emotional. You know, people think, I don't want to lose my mom. I want to keep mom alive as long as possible. I can't bear the thought of that. You want to pick the person who's like, I really want mom around, but it's more important to me that I honor mom's wishes. That is the right kind of person to pick. And we do have people who don't have anyone in mind. They don't know who to pick as a healthcare agent. And if that's the case, I'd encourage you to come meet with us next week, and we'll walk you through a different type of document where we can still capture your wishes.
Oh, come on. Okay, we did it. We're back in action. So we're going to move on to the next page, page 3. And at the very top of it, this general statement of authority granted, this states that your healthcare provider should obtain decisions on treatment and care from your healthcare agent if you can't make your own decisions. And again, like Preeti mentioned before, the healthcare agent should always try to include you in decision making to the extent that you can do possible, even if it's thumbs up, thumbs down, or blinking. We want to make sure that you're involved in your healthcare and in decision making. The middle section here on page 3 states what they can't do. So some things that a healthcare agent can't do are related to mental health. So they would not be able to admit you to an inpatient mental health facility against your wishes or consent to experimental mental health treatment. Both of those things require a separate court order in Wisconsin, a separate process. But otherwise it covers all other care. Preeti's going to talk about nursing home.
Okay, so this kind of relates back to that slide about Jamie's case and laws around being admitted into a care facility. So the bottom section of page 3 talks about admission to nursing home, or CBRF, which stands for community-based residential facility. That might be like an assisted living facility or a group home. And so it's asking if your healthcare agent would have the authority to admit you to a care facility for long-term care if you couldn't make a decision for yourself. So this is not about whether or not you want to live in a nursing home. This is about, if something happens to me, do I trust my healthcare agent to make the right decision for me if I need this kind of care? So if you check yes, what that means is that you trust your healthcare agent to admit you into a facility for long-term care without requiring a court order. On the other hand, if you check no, what that means is you are not giving your healthcare agent permission to admit you into a care facility. So if that was absolutely the kind of care you required, there was no way to safely get you back home, there was no other place that you could be cared for, if you check no to this, your loved one would have to go to court to get an order to admit you into a care facility, essentially overriding your power of attorney for a healthcare document. So checking no doesn't mean that you won't go to the nursing home. It just means that you've put extra protections in place so your family can't admit you. They'd have to go to court. They'd have to hire an attorney. Unfortunately, what that does, though, is it causes a delay in your transfer, a delay in rehab. And so because of that, we really recommend that you check yes. If you truly trust the person that you're picking as your healthcare agent, we recommend that you check yes to this question. And then, later, if you really feel strongly that you really would never want to go to a nursing home, you can write that in a separate section. Any questions about this one? Yeah.
If they cannot go, if it's checked no and they cannot go to a assisted living or a nursing home, whatever, what's the other alternative for their care and where?
Yeah, so if a person checks no and they still need to go to an assisted living or a nursing home, what the healthcare agent does is they work with an attorney to file paperwork with the court to essentially override this document. So if they would go to court, they would say, in the case of Jamie, say, Jamie needs nursing home care. There's no other way. We don't have care providers at home. Family's unable to care for Jamie. So they go to court and get what's called a protective placement order and a guardianship in order to admit that person into the care facility. So that's why we say checking no doesn't mean that you won't go to the nursing home. You probably still will if that's the level of care that you need. It just means your family's going to have to jump through some extra hoops to make it happen.
In the meantime, the patient would be at home.
Potentially at home or stuck in the hospital. Yeah. And is it still me? I can't remember. Okay. All right, so we're going to flip to page 4. This is another yes/no type question. And again, this only applies if you can't make your own healthcare decision. This is about if you allow your healthcare agent to make decisions about removing or withholding a feeding tube and IV fluids. So this is, again, not about your preferences around feeding tubes and hydration. This is about what kind of authority you feel comfortable giving your healthcare agent. If you check yes, this says, I trust you to make the right decision for me. If you feel like a feeding tube may not be something you would be okay with at some point in your life, you want to make sure that you're giving your healthcare agent the authority to make that kind of decision. So you would want to check yes. If you check no, it means you are not going to give your healthcare agent the authority to remove that feeding tube. And leaving it blank is the same as checking no, and I should have said that for the previous one as well. So again, we encourage people to check yes if they trust their healthcare agent, because you're no longer limiting their authority. They can make the decision based on your discussions together, what's in your best interest. If you check no, and we do have people who check no, maybe for religious preferences, they really feel strongly that a feeding tube should never be removed. That might be a case where you would check no. You wouldn't want anyone to have the authority to remove a feeding tube. But again, this is not about your preferences around feeding tubes. This is really about your trust in who you're picking. Did you have a question? No?
Question. So when I think about having a administration to this, I wonder if that person can, if the Raven would be involved.
You're not making sense.
Not making sense. Okay, well, that's part of my problem. See.
Just let it go.
Right. So let me see what I do with this side here.
Okay.
So when a doctor comes, could he ever fill the role that way?
Oh, that is a good question. Yeah, could a doctor sort of be the decision maker, fill the role as a healthcare agent? No, unless that doctor is a relative of yours, but you can't just pick your primary care doctor as your healthcare agent. That's a great question, because we do have people who say, I don't really have any family members that I trust, but I trust my primary care provider. Unfortunately, you can't have your healthcare provider serve in this role. It's a great question.
Well, many years ago, my mother, going through change of life, flipped out, and she was at Madison General for a while. And then she was shipped out to Mendota. Who decided on that move?
I think it would depend on what
Probably
year
20
that
to
happened.
30 years ago.
Yeah. What do you think the mental health laws were around 30 years ago? Here, I'll let you. I don't know if you have an answer. No, I think the laws were still, there must have been a court order.
I think there was likely a court order, which can be done with the hospital and the local crisis or APS, depending if someone was thought to be a danger to themselves or others, or couldn't meet their own needs. It might be related to mental health, which is kind of that separate process of where it really is a court order. But I can't speak to what happened certain years ago, but I do know that protection has been in place for quite some time in Wisconsin.
Over 20 years ago.
Yes.
So they shipped her out to Mendota, and then she was in like a house on the grounds with some other women.
Sure. Could have been a voluntary.
But she didn't know she was on foot or horseback.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
She was there for a while. I don't remember how long.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I'm not sure what happened there, but typically the protections that are put in place kind of go through the county crisis worker with the family still involved and updated and things, and the patient to the extent they can participate. But it likely was maybe concern for her ability to care for herself or a safety concern.
Yeah, it's hard telling. That was probably close to 30 years ago.
Yeah.
But
Well, I hope she received good care
She was in a
there.
house with 4 or 5 other women
Yeah.
on the grounds. And
Yeah.
worked in the kitchen.
Okay.
I don't know if that was by choice or
Yeah. Well, I hope she received good care.
she came out of it eventually.
Yeah, good. So Parini talked a little bit about nursing home and feeding tube. I'm going to talk about the other yes/no question on this document on page 4 in the middle section. Has to do with healthcare decisions for pregnant women. So if this does not apply to you, if you're not a person who's capable of becoming pregnant, you can just cross it off or check this doesn't apply to me. But if you are someone who's capable of becoming pregnant, you can answer this question. Checking yes would give your healthcare agent to make authority to make decisions for you if you're pregnant, even if it's unrelated to pregnancy. So for example, maybe in this example, I'm pregnant, I'm in a car accident, I break my hip needs surgery. My healthcare agent could make that decision on my behalf if I couldn't make my own decision. So it's unrelated to my pregnancy, but I'm pregnant, so it's kind of the special carve out. If I check no to this, and I'm pregnant or a person's able to become pregnant, the healthcare agent can't make decisions for that person during their pregnancy. That might require a court order. And again, leaving it blank is the same thing as checking no.
This is another one where we encourage you to check yes if it is, if you truly trust the person, we'd encourage you to check yes to all three of these.
Yep.
Because then you're not limiting the authority.
But this one, again, only if you're a person capable of becoming pregnant. And then page 4, in this box that we have highlighted, this is where you can really write in any special wishes that you might have. So this is optional. Some people choose to leave it blank, which is definitely okay. But maybe you've thought of things that you really want to make sure are written in your document for your healthcare agent to follow. So these are just some examples of what other people had said. So sometimes people write in there like, the quality of my life is more important than the length of my life. Or vice versa, I want my life to be extended to the greatest extent possible, regardless of my condition or prognosis. Other times, like Preeti said, maybe you really don't want to go to a care facility. Some people in here write, I prefer not to be placed in a care facility unless it's necessary and in-home care is not an option. So kind of, again, putting your preferences on your document for your healthcare team to know and for your healthcare agent to follow. Other things would be religious preferences, so maybe due to religious beliefs you don't want to receive blood products. That would be an important one to put on your form. Or maybe at end of life you'd like a visit from your faith leader or last rites. And then also any preferences on specific care agencies. So sometimes people have said, my loved ones got hospice from a Grace. I really liked a Grace. I'd like to make sure that I could use them if I needed hospice care. Or my dad was at Oakwood Village. I really liked that facility. If I ever needed to go to a nursing home, that's where I would want to go. So these are just some examples of things that people choose to write on their form. But again, you don't need to write anything, and either is completely fine. And then at the very bottom of this page, this says inspection and disclosure regarding information about my physical and mental health. It just restates what we talked about earlier, that your healthcare agent has the right to review and release your medical records. And then Preeti's going to talk about how we make this document legal.
Okay, so we're flipping over to page 5, and when you have completed this document, you want to sign it in the presence of 2 witnesses. So all of the dates need to match over here on the right. So only sign it when you're in the presence of 2 witnesses. And there are some important rules on who can and can't witness. So who can't witness would be anyone related to you by blood, marriage, or adoption. So your family members cannot witness your signature. If you pick a healthcare agent who maybe is a friend, that person cannot witness. Anyone that you choose on the form cannot witness your signature. And then healthcare providers, except for a social worker or chaplain. So your doctor can't witness your signature. The receptionist at the front desk cannot witness your signature. So there's some pretty strict rules around who can and can't witness. Now, who can? Your neighbors, your friends, anyone over the age of 18, not related to you and not a healthcare provider can witness. Staff at the senior center could witness. So you could bring your document here for witnessing. And then social workers, Mary and I are both social workers. We'll be back next week and available to witness documents, or a chaplain could witness it. If you are struggling with finding a witness and you can't come back next week, get in touch with us and we can help problem solve that. So you would sign at the top, and then your witness is going to print their name and sign and date. 2 of those witnesses, and again, just make sure that all of these dates match. This is probably the page that we see the biggest mistakes, and unfortunately, this is the page that makes your document legal. So it's important, we've seen a lot of like 2024 instead of 2025, so just really simple mistakes, but unfortunately, it makes it an invalid document.
Sometimes people ask if they can use a single notary instead of 2 witnesses, maybe like a notary at your bank. In this document, you have to have 2 people. So if one is a notary, you would still need a second witness. So really making sure that you have 2 different people witness your signature.
And then flipping to the back page, just calling out this top section here, this is optional. And the document is still valid even if this is not completed. And I would say the majority of people do not have this part completed. This is a statement that your healthcare agent understands they're being put in this role, and they're acknowledging it. So it's their information, their signature, that they know they're in this role. This is totally optional. You know, sometimes you're picking people who don't even live anywhere near you. That's fine. They don't need to fill it out. What I will say is that whoever you pick should know that you have picked them. Make sure that you let them know, hey, I've put you in this position as my healthcare agent, and then have a conversation with them about what your preferences are. What you don't want to happen, and this has happened to us, where, you know, patients land in the hospital, we see that they have a document, we call the person they selected, and they're like, hey, I haven't talked to Joe in 20 years. I had no idea Joe put me in this position to be a decision maker. I have no idea what he wants. We never talked about it. So make sure you talk to that person and make sure you let them know what your preferences are. That's important. Yeah.
A little strange to me that you don't need the consent of the person that you're asking to
Yeah.
be the healthcare agent.
Yeah, I was saying it's a little odd that we wouldn't need to have consent from the person. So you don't have to have consent from them to fill out the form. But I will say once we call them, that agent does have the right to say, I don't want to do this. So it's, you know, for example, I pick Mary as my decision maker. Something happens, the doctors call Mary. Mary has the right to say, I'm not comfortable doing this for Perini. I don't know what her wishes are. I'm going to decline this role. And then if I picked a second choice, it would go to the second person, because now it's either the person is unable or unwilling to serve in the role. So Mary would be unwilling to serve in the role. We would go to the second person on the document.
And if there is no second person, or the second person declines?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that has happened. We look to, if the person's in the hospital, say I'm in the hospital, per our policies, we would look to next of kin. So we'd have a social worker trying to track down any family I might have. But then in this case, that family member doesn't have any legal authority because they weren't named in the document. So we'd be going through that guardianship process if I needed long-term care. Good question.
So the bottom section is also optional to complete. So completely up to you if you want to fill it out. It has to do with organ and tissue donation. So similar question that if you get a driver's license or a state ID card, they'll ask you about it, and you can choose to complete it. This, where you sign and date, does not need a witness, but the other one does. So again, when we talk with the organ and tissue donation team, because we're like, do you have an age limit? Are there certain health limits to be an organ donor? And they said not necessarily. They would encourage anyone who would like to be an organ donor or like that to be pursued to check the box that matches their values, and that their team would then really go through a thorough medical history and see if there were a match. Maybe they could use tissue for someone needing it, but maybe not use a major organ. And so this is considered first-person authorization, which is considered legally binding. So if you check on here that you would like to be an organ donor, any needed organ or parts, that would be considered legally binding. So if something were to happen to you and you were able to move forward and donate your organs, this is kind of pre-consent for that. Again, you can check you would like to be an organ donor, you do not wish to donate any needed organs or parts, or that you'd only like to donate specific ones. Regardless of how you fill this out, your care at the hospital will not change. You as a patient are always our main priority, and so sometimes people are afraid if they check yes, they want to be an organ donor, will less care be given to them because maybe, you know, the organ and tissue donation could give your organs to someone else. And no, you're really the first priority, the patient. So I'd encourage you to fill this out with however it matches your values. Okay, so what did we do? We did our document. We make sure all of our dates match. We had it witnessed. And so now it's kind of time to do kind of those wrap-up steps. So you would want to make sure that you give a copy to your healthcare agent, so the people you name as your decision makers, and ideally have a conversation with them about what your wishes are. You'd want to give a copy to your primary care clinic or any healthcare organization you receive care at. If you meet with us next week, we are happy to get that into your medical record, whether it be at UW Health, SSM, Meritor, for example. If you get care elsewhere, we're happy to send that to them to add to your medical record. We'd encourage you, again, to talk to your loved ones about your document and your wishes. You should keep your original POA in a place where it can be found. So sometimes I worked with people and they said, I know mom has a POA box. I don't know where it is or anything about it. So it was safe, but nobody knew how to get to it. So I'd encourage you to keep your document in a place that people can find. Maybe you have a special folder that if your loved ones needed to find it. And again, it would always be available at your healthcare facility on file if you turned it into them. And then finally, so you did your document, and your document doesn't have an expiration date. It can be kind of good, just ongoing. But we'd encourage you to review it on the 5 Ds. So kind of every decade, every 10 years, take it out and does it still make sense to you? Do you still trust those people as your healthcare agents? Has your health changed? Maybe you want to make decisions regarding that, or have you had a decline in your health? Maybe there's been a death or dispute in your family that your healthcare agent is no longer living and you'd want to update those. Or a divorce, as Prini talked about. If you name your spouse as your healthcare agent and you become divorced, the document becomes invalid and you'd need to create a new one. So we just encourage people, like I said, if you've already completed a healthcare power of attorney and you'd like to sit down and review it with someone, we're more than happy to do that next week too. Or if you feel like I completed this, I saw one recently from 1985 and they thought it was time to update that, you bet, we're happy to help do that. Do we have time to play the video?
Yeah, I think we have time to do the video, and then we have a few minutes for questions.
Okay, so I'm going to play a video next. This is, it's a physician who wrote a letter to her family or her healthcare agents to kind of accompany with her power of attorney for healthcare. So you don't have to write a letter to your healthcare agent, but this is somebody who wanted to kind of give permission to their healthcare agent to make the decision that they thought was best, following their wishes, and kind of absolving them from any guilt they might have in decision making. Oops.
My letter's called Don't Panic.
Come on.
It's okay. A letter to my family. If you are faced with a decision that you're not ready for, it's okay. I'll try to let you know what I would want for various circumstances, but if you come to something we haven't anticipated, it's okay. And if you come to a decision point and what you decide results in my death, it's okay. You don't need to worry that you've caused my death. You haven't. I will die because of my illness or my body failing or whatever. You don't need to feel responsible. Forgiveness is not required. But if you feel bad, responsible, guilty, first of all, don't. And second of all, you are loved and forgiven. If you're faced with a snap decision, don't panic. Choose comfort. Choose home. Choose less intervention. Choose to be together at my side, holding my hand, singing, laughing, loving, celebrating, and carrying on. I will keep loving you and watching you and being proud of you.
So this video is from the Conversation Project, which is an excellent resource. We've got it listed here as the second one. They have great conversation starters. That's probably a whole nother lecture on, people say, how do I have this conversation with my healthcare agent? How do I start this? This can be kind of a morbid topic, or maybe people are like, I don't want to talk about it. That's never going to happen. You're going to live forever. So they have great tools on how to start those conversations, great videos, things like that. We, on our UW Health website, have access to free fillable documents and also available in several languages. We also offer monthly webinars where we sort of review the document page by page, and just some other great resources for questions. And that kind of wraps up our presentation for today. So we are going to have free advanced care planning appointments available in honor of National Healthcare Decisions Day. So it will be on April 16th. We're going to be here for several hours. And Katie, do you have the sign up for that? So you can either call or you can sign up with Katie if you're interested in meeting with us. And we have a few minutes for questions if there's any other questions. Yeah.
If you have a will in place, but it hasn't been reviewed for a while, and you need to or want to coordinate it with your POA for health care. I guess that hasn't been brought up as a maybe important consideration that they may or may not match upon death.
So the question is about if you have a will, how does it coordinate with that power of attorney for healthcare? Is that?
Yeah, I mean, I can see where it wouldn't influence, but
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm thinking.
Yeah, and it's a good question. So the real difference, there's a couple of differences. You know, wills often deal with finances, you know, divvying up your estate, who gets what. But it's really about after death, after you die, what happens. Whereas the power of attorney for healthcare is only valid while you are alive. When someone dies, that document is no longer relevant. So one's kind of for now, one's later, and it's really financial. So some people, you know, I'll take the example of I choose Mary as my healthcare decision maker, but maybe for my will, my assets are going to go to my children. So they're not always the same people. And a lot of people work with attorneys to get a will filled out. They can be very complicated depending on your estate, or they can be simple. Whereas a healthcare power of attorney can be done at no cost, you know, with a healthcare social worker.
And if maybe you've met with an attorney before and they kind of did a bundled document, they did a will and they did a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney, you can still redo just your healthcare power of attorney piece, and then that would supersede just that section that you previously did before with your attorney.
And I'd say most attorneys do bundle it. So if you've done a will with an attorney, there's a good chance you did a power of attorney for healthcare as well. So just going to look to make sure it still reflects your wishes.
One question. So if you are someone's power of attorney and there's an emergency that happens, even if that person does not want any life-saving measures, if like an EMS or first responder came, they would provide those life-saving measures unless the person had a do not resuscitate, correct?
Yeah, so just to repeat, there's if there was an emergency, say your heart were to stop or your breathing were to stop, 911 gets called, EMS would do all life-saving measures unless you were wearing that do not resuscitate bracelet. And that is absolutely accurate. If you do not want CPR, or if you wouldn't want, a breathing tube inserted if your heart or your breathing were to stop, you do need to talk with your doctor. You can put that wish in this document, but that also is a separate order. So in order to get a do not resuscitate order in the community, that's an order that's signed by a doctor and by you. So it's an extra step beyond this form. And so you have to sign a paper form, and then you also have to get a bracelet. If you're not wearing your bracelet, the EMS will have no idea what your preferences are. So the default would be to do everything to save your life. Great question.
Yeah. So you said if you were to get divorced and your spouse had been listed as your primary agent, and you're divorced now, the entire document is void, so they wouldn't just automatically go to the second?
Yeah, so good question. So the question is, if you name your spouse as your healthcare agent and you become divorced, is the entire document invalid, or would it just go to your second healthcare agent? So the state law says the entire document is invalid. So you'd want to create a new document, even if you still wanted your former spouse as your healthcare agent, but especially so if you want to, your second or third agent to now be primary. Good question. Other questions? Thank you so much for joining us and for your attention. We hope that you learned something, and please do come and see us next week if you'd like help with anything. More than happy to do so. Free. You don't have to be a patient of UW Health. We're just more than happy to work with you and answer any questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mm-hmm.